Hello, this is Daniel Muzquiz with ExamSoft. I'm the CEO, and I'm excited to be here today with Dr. Jane Souza from St. John Fisher College. She's doing wonderful work there, and I'm excited to be able to give her an opportunity to share the work she's doing at her program. So let's see. So a little logistics for the group. We would love questions from you, so please fill out the questions, and we'll do our best to answer them throughout the call as we go through it. And if you actually see, there should be a little box in the corner. If you click on it and add your questions, we'd love to hear from you. Now, with all of us in assessment today as professionals, I think we see the pressure to measure learning. But I think what we're really excited about is actually improving learning. That's what I get excited about. And I think that's why most people on this call are kind of dedicating their lives to education. The reality is we have challenges with the amount of time we have available for our mission. We have less resources to do it in. So when you put that together, being asked to do more with less, sometimes there's this tension or a friction or a choice that has to be made between objective assessments and subjective or performance assessments, or a computer graded like a Scantron versus say a human graded project or an authentic assessment. Well, we don't want that choice to be forced on anyone out there. We're trying to create a platform that allows multiple choice, objective, your traditional exam types to really live happily with authentic assessments, with rubrics and all the rich assessment methods that faculty have been using for eons, frankly. So our goal is to make sure that faculty don't have to choose how they want to assess. They get to pick whatever is best for them and their situation, their students. Along those lines, when you look at rubrics, we've spent a tremendous amount of time developing rubrics for faculty. And in fact, we've interviewed over 100 different faculty members, from adjuncts at state schools to tenured faculty at small private institutions, from art history all the way through to medical programs. And what we hear from them is they want something that's going to help them see the whole picture. They want the complete picture, so as they take their kids along this journey, they can really understand the landscape that they're helping them navigate. And as importantly as that, it has to save time, because faculty continually say they're strapped for time. There's so many demands on them, from publishing to research to committees, and not to mention just the energy that goes into the teaching process itself. So you have to net save time, and that's why I'm so excited that we took so much energy in designing rubrics in a way that's great for faculty. And here's a couple key features of what we designed rubrics to do before I turn it over to Jane. So first of all, rubrics are very easy to create. So we want to make sure they're very easy to create, but also very easy to store and manage. So you have all the sharing capabilities you've come to expect from ExamSoft. So a new adjunct can automatically, if a tenured professor wants to share their rubrics, they can. If your program wants to create AAC and U-value rubrics and use them throughout their program, they can be set up as templates. Or if you have clinical or OSCE rubrics that you've been using for a while, let's put those in the system and allow faculty to use those as well. Or if you so choose, you can allow them to modify it and make it their own. Another great feature that faculty were talking about is they wanted the ability to do rubrics on, say, a presentation in the front of the class where it might be a pure oral presentation, but they also wanted students to be able to upload files so that students can be submitting all the artifacts for whatever submission it is, and then the faculty would have those artifacts to see in the system and then apply a rubric to them. So it's almost like a Dropbox for student assessments. And this is optional if you so choose to use that. Now, once the assessments have been created and students have actually gone through with the assessment, the grading process is streamlined. Faculty asked for something that was easy to use, but also very tablet friendly, because we have a lot of people asking to use iPads. So you can use a traditional laptop or a PC, but you can also use an iPad in a very touch, color-friendly way. And as everybody on the call has come to appreciate, if you look at the learning analytics capabilities that ExamSoft's been doing for years now, about a third of the people on this call are current clients, and they love those analytics. That's one of the main reasons that they engage with ExamSoft. But if you're one of the 2/3 of the clients on the phone or prospects on the phone who are not clients, the learning analytics capabilities that Rubrics is going to roll in is wonderful, because there will be no artificial lines between the Rubrics data and the non-Rubrics data or the traditional exam data. All those analytics can run together seamlessly together, and they're right at the tips of faculty's fingertips or at the administration. So everyone can get quick access to those deep insights to help them do a better job in their respective area. So with that said, I'd love to turn it over to Dr. Jane Souza, and she can tell us about her program there and how she's going to be rolling in this new Rubrics capability to her program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I would like to take this opportunity to continue that conversation about addressing the gap. And how I would like to do that is by telling a little bit of sharing a case study in how one institution, a school at St. John Fisher College, is addressing that gap through rubrics or plans to do that in the very near future. So in order to start this case study, I'd like to tell you about the how we get started there. What were the goals driving this? And the goals, I think you'll recognize, being similar to what's on most campuses. From the administrative perspective, we wanted to document the curriculum coverage for many reasons, to know what we were covering programmatically, but also to be able to report to our accreditors. From the faculty perspective, they want to collect formative data on how the students are doing in their classes for continuous improvement. And from the student perspective, and the most important for us, was to identify student weaknesses early in the program and remediate early. We certainly don't want to wait till the end of the year or an end of a program to find and discover their areas of weakness. So these are the driving forces behind even looking at embedded assessment. So how does this, what does this have to do with the gap? I think the best way is to demonstrate to you how we're using the data now and how rubrics will fill in that gap for us. If you look at this first grid, you will see that there are some topics here. Pharmacology, special populations, drug information. These are accreditation standards. Every time our faculty ask a question that maps to the accreditation standards, they code it, what we call coding in ExamSoft. We tag that item or code that item to the corresponding accreditation standard. So the result is, at the end of the semester, we know how many exams addressed that accreditation standard and how many items were inside that exam addressing, or inside those exams addressing the accreditation standard. And more importantly is this third column. We know the student average on each of these topics. So this is pretty good. It's capturing all the data that we have on all our assessments. But you'll notice that there's only 9 exams here with 13 items under medication safety, and only 3 exams in literature evaluation with only 25 items. Well, the fact is, we actually evaluate much more of students in those target areas, only they're being currently assessed in a rubric, not in a traditional exam. So we're missing that data. It's not being accumulated and added into this or figured into this average here. Looking at this another way, we also code each of our test items to either knowledge, application, or synthesis. So at the end of 2 semesters, we actually had 2,900 plus test items at the knowledge level, and we know the students were scoring 84.73%. Application, they didn't do quite as well. Synthesis, not quite as well. All good stuff, exactly what we expected. But if you look again, you'll see there are only 83 test items that were coded or mapped to the synthesis level. Well, in fact, we're doing a whole lot more at the synthesis level. The problem is it's performance-based data. And that is, for example, oral presentations, longer term papers, poster projects, counseling sessions, anything that is performance-based that is being captured in a rubric, we're missing from this great quality data that we have right now is there. So if we can go on to the next slide, I'll show you another way to look at it. prior to capturing these learning analytics in ExamSoft, our curriculum map looked like many curriculum maps I have seen. We have all the learning outcomes across the top, and then we have our courses along the side, and we put an X where each one of those learning outcomes is addressed. Well, that's lovely. Now, this could be at any level. It could be at the course level, but it could also be even as large as, let's say, our institution has goals, and one of the learning outcomes is to capture our students' ability with respect to quantitative reasoning, and the next one is critical thinking, and the next one is written communication, etc. So all the places we assess that and capture that, we would put a little X in that box. That is good, but we've moved past that again, and now we're able to take those same learning outcomes and pull the learning analytics out of the exams and tell you how the students are doing on each of those. And what's more important, we can tell you how they're doing on those in year 1, how they're doing in year 2, how they're doing in year 3, so that you can actually track the students' growth over time. So imagine that you were looking at the quantitative reasoning skills for a cohort or an individual, and you were seeing what the percentage was at. You can see that percentage grow or move, or the needle move over time. So this is really good for us, again, but it's still missing something. In this demonstration, we had a weakness in learning outcome 3, so that represents a challenge, but we also discovered that, again, this data on this chart only represents what was captured through traditional exams, and there are some learning outcomes that are much better expressed, and the students perform better on items that are evaluated through a rubric. So here's an example of what we're moving to with the rubrics. I think Professor Anthony Corigliano over at the School of Pharmacy allowed me to talk about what he's doing with rubrics in the counseling session. Now, in this scenario, the students are counseling a patient, a standardized patient, and so they're acting out this part, and the student is performing a counseling session, and they're being evaluated on several dimensions within a rubric. So Professor Corigliano has mapped this through the synthesis level, and he's also mapped it to the various performance standards for the School of Pharmacy accreditors. So when a student gets graded on this rubric and say this box here, not only will his grade get recorded on his individual report, but then it's going to start filling in that gap we were talking about in the large curriculum map, where only the exam data was being collected. So we're really minding the gap in that. Another example is coming to us on the next page from Dr. Mona Gandhi. And she has an interesting thing, because this will be recognizable to anyone who does research projects or in-class performances. She has a poster session that she asks students to do. They research a topic, they present the data on a poster, and then they actually give an oral presentation on their poster. Wonderful poster session. So very high level, it's synthesis, but she's able to track, now think about this, she's able to track her information literacy skills, her presentation skills, her research skills, of course the content itself. So she is mapping to the synthesis level and to learning outcomes that are addressed in her classroom, in the program, and actually in the school, in the entire school. Such broad things such as critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, and oral communication. So again, we're minding that gap by capturing this data that is well beyond what we would be able to test in a traditional exam environment. So how does that translate to us, for us? Well, a couple of years ago, here's where we were. This was good. We have all our learning outcomes for the course. The faculty says, okay, I've got 5 learning outcomes for this course, and I am assessing those learning outcomes with these exams and these papers and presentations. So we feel confident that all of the course learning outcomes are being evaluated. Then we introduced the learning analytics through ExamSoft and captured the data from all those assessments. And so now we're able to say, okay, I know where I am assessing each of those learning outcomes, but I also know how the students are doing on each one of those. And in this example, what is lost in that gap that keeps appearing is the figures that you see in the exam average only reflect the paper exams, or I should say the computer exams. We are no longer giving paper exams, but they're not, those figures are not expressing or not including the literature evaluation papers or the written assignments that are given. They are also not addressing or including the presentations. So you can see this is great data. It's better than what we have before, but it's not where we want to be. The best case scenario is when we can add to that the student performance on their rubrics. And then when I look at the total, then I'm going to have a much better sense of where the students are performing and how well our curriculum is being covered. From the student perspective, and I like this example because this really represents a real student that we had looked at. Great student, all the courses, looks like 90 average. If you looked at all of the courses, 90, 92, 95, this is wonderful. But when we disaggregated that data, and instead of looking at that student only from the course perspective, we looked at that student from the learning outcome perspective. We were able to identify that he does in fact have a weakness, and in this particular case the learning outcome was calculations. Now imagine that you have only a couple of exams, a couple of questions within an exam that addresses calculations. Well, it's very easy for that to get hidden in a paper or an exam where he gets an A. So this is, again, it's very, very good. It's much more than we had before. I love that it encourages the students to look not just at his final grade, but what is the learning that is represented by that grade. And now if we can fill in that gap and we can also collect the learning that is being evaluated through a rubric, that only makes this data that we're giving back to the student that much more powerful. And finally, I just want to give you a sneak peek at what our students are doing now. They are all generating their own longitudinal reports. Now, and again, if it didn't have this gap, I'd be spinning cartwheels, and I will be spinning cartwheels soon, because right now, when the student goes into the computer and he types in, I want to look at how I'm doing on all the learning outcomes from last fall up until this point this fall, he can request that data on his own computer, on his own time, and the web portal, and look where his peers are doing on these learning outcomes, and then see where he is doing on those learning outcomes. If he's below the peer average, it'll show up in red. If he's close, it'll be yellow, and if he's above or on target, it'll be green. The opportunities for improvement are checked off for him. So if he doesn't feel like looking at the colors and want to look at the checks, he can go right to that. And to give you a sense of how important this is to us, each of our students are looking at their longitudinal data, printing this out, making an appointment with their faculty advisors, and sitting down to discuss, here's where I am across the curriculum, across the courses. Who should I go to help me with learning outcome 1 here, where I'm in the red? So again, the more information, the more complete the learning analytics that we have accessible to us, the more meaningful this chart becomes. So you can see, I hope, why we're so excited about being able to move into rubrics. And I think that completes my quick case study.
Great. Jane,
and I'll turn it back over to Dan.
I love hearing how you're actually applying this in the field. That's wonderful. So what I wanted to do right now is, I'm sure some people are actually saying, I'd like to look at the software. I'd actually take a sneak peek at it. So I have a few screenshots and some highlights of some of the more interesting features that it does. But I would encourage everyone to ask as many questions as you'd like about how to apply it in the field, and Jane would be wonderful about addressing some of those, or technical questions, please ask any questions you want, and we'll do our best to address them here on the call. So let's take a deeper look at the rubric solution, how it actually functions. So as you saw before in some of the screenshots there, we're really focused on making it a happy experience, right? Let's create rubrics, share them, and let's all be happy together. And you're actually looking at the creation screen right now. And you can see that across the top you've got rows and columns. You can add multiple rows, add multiple columns, subtract them. Literally in 3 clicks you could create a rubric. You have a lot of flexibility on your point system as well as how much you're going to weight each of the rows. It's very easy to go in and just type in how you want to define different criteria or edit them. And as kind of what really gets exciting is you can link every row, you can assign every row to multiple learning outcomes, as Jane was referencing in her presentation. So that allows you from a category system, and that's what we call it in our system, is our learning outcomes are kind of like categories. It now allows each one of these rows to kind of, grow legs and tentacles and kind of allow all kinds of great data analytics and learning analytics to be done at the course level, faculty level, all the way up to the program level. So that's actually a really powerful piece, is being able to assign multiple categories to every row. So another thing that we heard from faculty was, hey, when we go about posting this, when we go about distributing the assessment, we'd like a few features in the system. And one of the first one was, faculty know that it's good pedagogy to submit rubrics ahead of time to students so students know how they're going to be evaluated. So if you so choose and the situation warrants it, you can release the rubric ahead of time to students so students will actually know how their assignment is going to be assessed. That's an option for faculty. In the same screen, faculty can decide to send instructions out to students. So the instructions could be, please, your report should be this long, or this many references, it's about this subject, here's the due date, etc. Or it could be, hey, we'd like you to show up for your clinical evaluations at this time, this is your assignment, or whatever, something along those lines. So you have the option of sending instructions out to students in the same, couple clicks of a button. And as we mentioned before about uploading, every time you have an assessment, you have the option of saying, I would like to request the student to turn something in. And again, there's lots of different file formats that it can take, and it'll be in the system for you to actually assess or grade that deliverable. It'll also be there, in perpetuity, effectively, so that you can reference it later and students can reference their submissions later. So it's almost like a Dropbox storage system for you as well and for the students. Now, let's look at the grading process. So you've said, hey, everybody, do this deliverable, and let's assume they submit an essay. This would be the student submission on the left side, and if you're a faculty member, this would be the screen you'd be looking at. You'd have the student submission on the left. You'd have a rubric that floats on the right side. So if you need to scroll up or down on the left-hand side, your rubric stays right there for you the whole time. And it's really simple. You can just go through there and tap on the rubric and grade it. If you're curious, you can, the little circles you see on the right rubric, if you tap on one of those with the little eye, it'll actually give you the details of what actually that guideline means. So you don't have to guess, but it also doesn't clutter up your screen. Now, on the grading side, there's also a full screen rubric. Let's assume you're a patient is coming in and you're doing a simulated patient visit or a counseling session, as Jane was saying. You could go through and quickly on an iPad or some other device, an Android, go through and actually assess the student going through their paces. And you can add great voiceover on top of each one of these vectors or these dimensions. So you can give the extra feedback to the student on, here's some extra color on why you got a 3 versus a 4 or an X versus a Y. And what's great about putting those comments in is, just like in our current solution where it's really easy to get feedback to students, rubrics function the same way. Right when you're done assessing, you can release the results to the students, and they're going to get, this is exactly the report that a student would get. It looks just like this, where they get a color-coded screen, so they don't have to guess. They know exactly how they did. And your comments are actually embedded inside of the rubric. So you can really have a great one-on-one conversation with a student in a very efficient way. So as you go through, you just go through there, add your comments, and the students will all get their own individual, customized, really clear baseline reports so they can make office hours much more efficient so they kind of understand so they can remediate with each other. It's actually a wonderful thing to get these back to students. What we're not showing here, and I didn't bother showing it because Jane did such a good job on her explaining how she's doing it at the programmatic level, is all the learning outcomes are aggregated. So the student obviously isn't going to see all the learning outcomes. Let's assume you're doing an accreditation push or you're doing, let's assume a cognitive reasoning effort at your institution to get the program more tuned in that way. You can have all those analytics running in the background. Student doesn't have to see them, but all that data is there for you guys. And faculty didn't have to do anything different than their day-to-day activities. It's actually a wonderful thing. So with that said, there was a few screenshots. I'd love to go into some questions here, and I think I've got some in front of me. Let's see, pause real quick. So while we're paused here, and I think Ken is going to pull up some questions. If you're a new prospect, so if you're not currently an ExamSoft client, please drop an email to info@examsoft.com or call the number on your screen. We'd love to circle back up with you and answer any questions you have. Or if you're sitting there going, I'm curious, but I don't want to talk to anybody at ExamSoft, we'd be happy to put you in touch with one of our clients and they can explain to you some of the ins and outs of the solution. If you're a current client, you're sitting there going, I'd really like to take a look at that in more detail, or I'm really interested in lining it up, please feel free to drop an email to rubrics@examsoft.com, and we've got a team that kind of specializes in rubrics, ready to kind of walk you through how you might set it up at your institution to make it as effective as you've come to expect from assessments. So with that said, I've got a couple questions here, and Jane, you might be able to answer this first one. The first one revolves around faculty buy-in. In a nutshell, how did you go about getting faculty buy-in for this sort of a more granular assessment approach?
Well, actually, we took this up first with our curriculum and assessment committees, and we showed them the possibilities of what could be done, and they voted to, yes, let's move forward in looking at embedded assessments in this depth. And then we took that recommendation to the all faculty and staff committee, and they voted on it. And once we decided we were going to do this, then in order to get in front of maybe some possible problems, so we did a lot of training. So we trained them on how to use the software, which I have to say is pretty intuitive, but also some training on how to do the coding, how to match to Bloom's taxonomy, how to find the right fit for the program learning outcome, etc. So arming the faculty with the training that they would need ahead of time was very important. Also having a support person there. For example, I'm willing to support the faculty and assist them with anything that they need to do. But once the faculty realized what they had at their fingertips, I have to tell you there wasn't any more need for worrying about faculty buy-in. The faculty are using this in pretty incredible ways to do scholarship of teaching and learning. And let me just share one really quick story. One of our faculty members who is, he's just wonderful, and he mapped all of his learning outcomes to his exam items, and he wasn't happy with the student performance on one of them. So he really looked at what he could do pedagogically different. So he added turning point questions and work groups and different strategies, and then retested the following year and looked at that same dimension, at that same learning outcome, and how he had moved the needle, increased the number. And then, of course, wrote about it and wrote about what happened and how he went to how to address that need the students had for greater understanding. So that's just a quick example, but the faculty are doing some pretty wonderful things with the data they have access to. And one plug on that, they have access to it. They do not have to go to the assessment professional or to a department chair or anybody. They can go in there and look at the analytics themselves. If they want some help on how to interpret, they've got it, but they can run the reports they want to, and they get a lot of power at their fingertips. So that's pretty cool, and the faculty really do appreciate that.
Great, Jane. Thank you very much for that answer. There's a couple here that I can probably answer. One of them is, do paper exams or computer-based exams? We often hear that question, how do you go about, or can you use both functionalities? And the answer is yes. You can use paper exams and import it on Scantron if you're using a typical objective type assessment, or you can use a computer-based exam. Now, Rubrics is very similar in that you can have somebody submit a paper to you and not actually have the artifact in the system, or if you want them to, they could upload a PDF as an example, and you could apply a rubric to that as well. There was another question about LMSs and the integrations with LMSs. So we do have integrations. We have a nice integration with Blackboard, and we have some other integrations with some of the common platforms out there. So if you have a specific question about your LMS, we'd love to have that conversation. Just set expectations about here's what it does and here's what it doesn't do, so that we all go in eyes wide open. But we put a lot of energy into the integration side because we know that fitting into the ecosystem is hugely important. Let's see, Jane, there was a question here. Do you use categories to tie the learning objectives to exam items or to a rubric?
Actually, currently, remember the rubrics are coming. We're still in the pilot phase with those. We will be tying every learning outcome to the dimensions on the rubric. So absolutely, that's why we want to incorporate that. But right now, for example, if you ask a test question, every single question you ask, you'll be tying it, or we call it coding, we'll be coding it to what learning outcome does it address at your course level, what program outcome does that question address, and what accreditation standard, and we also do Bloom's taxonomy. So every single time a student answers a question, you're capturing all that information at once. And that's why you're able to sort how am I doing on, how many questions did I ask on learning outcome 1? 56. How many did I ask on learning outcome 2? 75. Because it's all there. And while you're building your tests, the ExamSoft builds you a blueprint that lets you know how many questions you're asking on each of the learning outcomes. So yes, we absolutely do code every single question to a learning outcome.
Great, thanks, Jane. Yeah, I think that summarizes it well. You have one set of learning outcomes, and you can liberally apply those to multiple choice items or objective items or rows on a rubric, and that allows everything to get tied together. Thanks, Jane. Let's see, there was a question here about some faculty like using ranges instead of a single point value for a column, and they're asking if that functionality is there, and yes, that is going to be in the solution. For our January release, it probably won't be there for January, but it should be there shortly after in the spring, because we do we're constantly adding features to our solution as our clients know. So it'll always get better than it is today, and we continue to invest in making it stronger and stronger. So we will have the ability for ranges. In our interview, in our interviews with faculty, that was something that was very important. One of the other questions on here was, let me see. Oh, will there be a limit to the amount of columns or rows you can use on a rubric? There are no limits to the number of rows. I think columns are limited to 6 columns. And now, if you're like, that's crazy, can't believe you guys did that, you're nut jobs, let us know, we can readdress that. We primarily did it for usability on screen. So if you got too many columns, it got really hard for the user interface to be clean and simple. So you have up to 6 columns and unlimited number of rows. So let's see. Jane, there were 2 questions specifically for you. One is, can you repeat what school you're from? And then the second question was, how many categories do you use in your program?
Okay. I am from St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York. And we use an awful lot of categories because the school that is using this in this depth right now is the School of Pharmacy. The accreditation standards alone have 219 bullet points. So literally you could, and we do have questions tagged to that many different categories just on the accreditation side. And then we have a code on the learning outcome, and then another one on Bloom's taxonomy. But I know some people might think right away, oh my goodness, I never get the faculty to code that many questions. I want you to think about it from a very practical perspective for a moment. If you're teaching in a course, you're not responsible for the entire curriculum. You know you're pretty much addressing very specific program learning outcomes, so you're coding to the same ones all the time. So if you're teaching an English class, you know what ones maybe you have separate codes out for understanding context and writing and et cetera. So you have your individual ones, but you know you're dealing with the same learning outcomes over and over again, so you don't have to go searching through 219 all the time for yours. So it's not as cumbersome as it would sound, but it also encourages faculty to see they're not covering the whole curriculum. That every faculty member in every course contributes to the entirety to show that yes, we cover the curriculum. Here's where I contribute, here's where someone else contributes, and we put all this together. We have a well-rounded, full, well-represented program. I think that's particularly important when you're talking about at the larger level, maybe at the programmatic or even at the school level. For example, quantitative reasoning. You're not the only one dealing with quantitative reasoning. There are several other people who are coding to that, but when I pull that all together, I can see how rich and how often we're assessing the students on quantitative reasoning. So yes, we code to a lot, but it isn't as onerous as one might initially think.
Jen, I could add a little color to that as well. So currently we just celebrated our 500th client at ExamSoft, so we're really thankful for everybody out there who's kind of taking assessment to the next level, and we'd love to be part of that journey. Well, in that process, we get to see a lot of different category structures out there, and some of the common category blocks that we'll see used. Often there's an accreditation category system that will get applied to exam items. That will also going to be getting applied to rubric rows as well, or to the whole rubric. That's usually one. The other one is a curricular learning objectives map, so you can go through and map your curriculum. And those are probably the two most common ones that we see. The other one that we will occasionally see for professional programs, not as much for undergraduate, but for professional programs, they will also have, say it's a nursing program, they'll have the NCLEX, which is the NCLEX breakdown of the different subject areas. They'll also include those in the category tree. So they can do all kinds of analytics, as Jane was saying. You can do analytics to say, hey, when your auditors or your site visit comes up, you can run a report and wow them, and you'll probably win an award because you can point to a student and tell exactly how they're doing. Right? So that would be the accreditation one. From a curricular map, you can actually, as Jane showed well in her presentation, you can show here's how our curriculum is performing, here's where it's doing really well, and here's some opportunities for improvement, and you get great self-reflection in that process. And I think you get a lot of faculty who sometimes lean out of the process will now start leaning into the process because assessment's really helping them. And then from an NCLEX or if you have a certification exam that you applies to your program, you can do a lot of diagnostics. So you can actually go in and say, are students A, being assessed enough in all the different areas, and B, are they likely going to pass, or do they have some holes in their game on that certification matrix? And I think Rubrics allows us to do that in a much richer way now that you can do clinicals and OSCEs. So, Jane, thank you very much for taking, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to mention one thing on that because I've heard questions before about, the faculty and concern about what burden we were placing on them. And I just want to make one comment. When we began, we started mapping only to the accreditation standards and to the program learning outcomes and to Bloom's taxonomy. And it was the faculty who asked us to take it down and code to their individual course learning outcomes. So you can see they not only bought in, as trying to find that buy-in, but they were asking for more because they could do different things with the analytics the more they had accessible to them. So I just wanted to make that point because I do get a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great where once faculty appreciate that the data is really for their use, their consumption, they start coming up with great ideas, and I think that's a wonderful example. Jane, thank you for taking the time. I think we're about out of time. We've hit our about 45-minute time slot, and we very much appreciate you joining us today, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. My pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us on the call today. Have a wonderful Halloween. Happy Halloween.